Welcome to another edition of programming. So today we're going to be doing a demonstration of a choose your own adventure game. Uh, in general, if you remember back to your books when you were younger, or perhaps even now, or perhaps in the future, choose your own adventure story is where at some point in the story, a pivotal point, the reader must make a decision. And that decision involves perhaps turning to one page for one choice and turning to another page for another choice. In our case, we are going to be making choices through user input um, through a menu of options. So to start out, I've made a new program. It's called spacerace.java, and it's an adventure game based on, in this case, some story about space. So to start out, I've created a scanner object. I've set some integer to represent fuel. It'll be pivotal to my story later on. This is a very complicated and nuanced story, as you'll see while we develop it. I've created this sort of title page right here. And this title section is simply tabulated in twice, and it describes my game. In fact, it's the title of the game, Space Game. And you can tell it was something that took me quite a while to come up with. Very complicated and nuanced. So to start out, I have some print statements that describe a situation. It introduces the story, this section. So you find yourself transported into a vessel adrift in space. You are surrounded by strange beings and have no sense of what your role might be in what seems to be a coming sporting event. You're told that you should jump into a race, and in this case, the announcer of indeterminate species indicates that you should jump into the nearest ship. Speed ship. Sounds much better. Okay, so we have a few things to think about. So I might say that as the race begins, you notice several buttons labeled on the dashboard. You decide to press one as the race starts. Oops. So you notice several buttons labeled on the dashboard. You decide to press one as the race starts. And now we are going to give out our options for our buttons. This is where a menu happens. Enter a number to choose your poison. Use the glowing flux capacitor, stolen from Back to the Future. Now I'm going to copy this and paste. 2. Ignite the turbo light engine. And 3. The third thing we might want to try is to fire our lasers. So all of these should end up giving us some sort of expanded storyline. To start out with my choice selection, I have to create a variable to store a user's choice so I can use it later. Then I have to use my scanner object, which I've named keyboard in this case, to read in the next integer that a user enters. Now, this value that they enter, this number, will be stored in the variable choice, and therefore I can use the variable choice to interact with the user's decision. So I will use an if statement here. So I'm going to begin my choice management. If they chose 1, then this if statement, this condition here, is true. So they will have decided to use the flux capacitor. Otherwise, maybe they chose 2. Well, in that case, they chose to use the turbo light engine. Notice I'm commenting in these so I don't forget what choices I've given them. If their choice is 3, they fire the lasers. And otherwise, in any other case, if they enter anything else, this condition will be tripped, and we will say that they have made a terrible mistake. And then we make a reference to Doctor Who. Up here, we're going to do a little bit of cleanup here. Just to give the user something to write, or to read properly. So now I'm going to run this, and we're going to have a look at what a user would see at this point. Right now, not too much is going to happen. I run my program, and you'll see a lot of text. You'll probably want to go through and make this a little prettier. That means at the end of each statement or beginning of each section, you might want to do a \n for an extra space there. Then you'd say here \n, and then maybe again here, another \n. And that, if I run this, you will notice you get more separation here. So it's a little easier to read. The user gets a sense of how the story is going. And then I have the option to enter a number. If I enter 1, nothing happens because I haven't defined that behavior yet. Likewise, if I run this program again and I enter 4, I get this error message because I didn't have an option for 4, and the user chose 4. Typically, you might say error between keyboard and chair if you're a smart aleck programmer. You might say that you have, you might start in the middle of a sentence and say something like, the Klingons continued on their merry way. Something that doesn't make sense in the context of the story, much like a Choose Your Own Adventure book wouldn't make any sense if you turned to the wrong page. Now, if I want to add more choices to my story, if I want to add more flair, first, maybe I'll say something like this for the flux capacitor. Upon activating the capacitor, or the flux capacitor, you are transported back in time to the age of the dinosaurs. So as you can see here, I'm already making this story sort of weird. You should be creative. You should make it interesting. You should make it unexpected. Now I'll give some more options. One, run away. Oh, in this case, maybe I'll have a few options here. Let's say I'll only have 2 options, but I'm going to use the top one for another message. You see a large lizard. Do you? Or choose wisely. Run away. Attempt to eat the large lizard for dinner. So we have 2 options here, and they're silly options. We went from a space game to a dinosaur game in the blink of an eye, or the blink of a flux capacitor. So we have another if statement here to continue our set of choices. I might say if, what have I forgotten? I've forgotten to take in another choice. I'll maintain my choice variable. I'll just read in a new number from the user. And I will say again, if choice is 1, if the new choice is now 1, i.e. correlating to this one option of run away, maybe I'll say something like, you trip on a root and fall into a bog. Millions of years later, your ancestors find your bones, your fossilized remains. Okay, so something like this, then maybe I'll say, so a game over screen. Upon game over, I might want to immediately quit the program, which I can do with this command. As soon as that command is hit, the computer will end the program immediately, no matter what's afterward. This is sort of a safeguard in this case for us. If they didn't choose 1, if they chose 2 instead, maybe they'll have some option here to continue with the story even further. Or you could terminate the story here. It doesn't really matter. It's your story, your choice. So else if choice is 2, and then else, if they didn't choose anything correct, you can again do something like this, where you say, your confusion led you to be trampled. Game over. And then again, maybe a system.exit 0. And then you have one option to follow here, where someone might say, what was our option? Our option was attempt to eat the large lizard for dinner. You succeed, but the large lizard, is too big to digest fully. And then maybe something like, you may either sleep off your gluttony or attempt to wander the landscape. And then you'll give the options below, where it's something like, again, sleep or to wander. And as you go through, you would again do another set of choices where you again use the scanner to read a choice. And again, if choice is 1, you do one thing. If choice is 2, you do another thing. And so on and so forth. But we have several nested statements here, and each statement has a correlating story piece associated with it. Don't go too deep, because you'll get, I've just filled out the basics of like my choice 1. In here, if I activate the turbo light engine, there might be a storyline that says, oh, well, you can't handle the G-forces, either turn it off or try to weather the storm. And then, or you might say something like, all of the lights turned on, and that's what the turbo light engine does. If you try to fire your lasers, what might happen would be that, let's say, they're just laser pointers, really. So all they do is distract the other drivers. You stream past and cruise to victory. And so that would be another branch here. In the end, you want to comment any major sections. You'll want to make sure that your story is fun to play. You'll notice if I run this, I have some options. I'll choose to use the flux capacitor. I have my story here. I'll attempt to eat the large lizard. I succeed, but the large lizard is too big to digest fully. You may sleep off your gluttony or attempt to wander the landscape. I could sleep or wander, but I haven't actually written those options, and the game would end. So you want to give a satisfying conclusion no matter what happens. If I were to run my game again, I choose my flux capacitor. I instead try to run away, but I trip on a root and fall into a bog millions of years later. My ancestors find my fossilized remains, and game ends. So it's mostly a story-driven game. Keep that in mind, and it will be uh, satisfying when you have other people follow along with the story you created. If there are any questions, email me, and good luck.